there are questions that are really technical. I'm coming in like baby, Tiago, in the world of metaverse and blockchain. But then my interest is into trying to understand all of this in the context and the lens of our practitioners and players in the Philippines were able to adapt.
Well, that's great actually, because I, as a journalist covering the space, I talk to a lot of technologists, and of course, there's a lot of excitement about what these technologies can do, what blockchain can do, what Web3 technologies can do. But I think just as important is what are the needs, what exactly are the areas in which we need to innovate, and who are the people we need to help, because it gives direction to that whole innovation thrust. No,
I cannot agree more. Yes.
So I mean, just to get into it, then I know today actually marks the start officially of Philippine Blockchain Week. So this is the kickoff to many, many months of preparation, maybe even a year of preparation. But I also know that we're in the middle of a month-long series of initiatives supporting Philippine Creatives this month of September. So maybe could you tell me a bit about that? What's been happening this month?
Okay, so a bit of context, Tiago. We're now in the era where we're implementing a newly created enacted law. We call it the Philippine Creative Industry Development Act. In the parlance of legal, it would be Republic Act 11904. So gone are the days that our creative sectors and creative players in the Philippines has been fragmented, and the clustering of all of these are not within the realm of governance. This time around, we found them a home, created a home. The government is now invested in the development and the promotion of the creative sector. So alongside with that, the law promises to promote creative outputs, at the same time support the creative industry players. When we say creative industry players, Tiago, we talk about certain number of natural and artificial beings. So artificial beings could be creative firms. These are actually the formal ones, or even you are in the informal, or they call it in the gig or the freelance. But as long as you are within the creative firm sphere, you could be an artist, you could be an artisan, you could be a creator, you could be a content provider, and you could be a creative worker, or you could be all of those six. So having named them or branded them so that we will not be able to enumerate all of them, we always refer them to creative industry players. So now, coming to the question, the law said that if we would like to promote the creative goods and services of our creative industry players, and we would like to raise the awareness of the pivotal role of the creative industry in nation building, then we have to declare a month as a Philippine Creative Industry Month. And so the September of every year, and this particular year is the inaugural or the first celebration of that Philippine Creative Industries Month. And so the entire Philippines, starting September 1, has actually co-bannered and co-branded a number of events from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And I'm happy to answer that question, because we've been doing about 75 events all over the country.
Wow.
And it's no longer a story, Tiago, of a concentration in Manila. Although the Philippine Blockchain Week that is happening today is in Marriott Grand Ball, we still have a number of activities that are also related to that are in Cebu, happening in Davao, and certainly we can talk about it in more detail later.
Yeah, and I think that particular point is extremely exciting, that it's not just clustered in Manila, because I mean, there are so many centers of excellence when it comes to creatives around the country. Just not too long ago, I was in Dumaguete, visiting Silliman University.
That's where I came from, Tiago.
Oh, you just came from there. Okay, so yeah. So
I lived there. I lived there. I was born there. Thank you for my beloved place.
Well, shout out to Dumaguete. No, because I mean, let's not forget, no, Dumaguete is well respected not just in the country but in the entire region when it comes to creatives, creative writing, and nonfiction, fiction. It's a bastion of creatives as well. I'm not trying to suck up. I didn't know you were from Dumaguete, but
yeah,
but throughout the country, there are all these centers of excellence, and it's not just in, let's say, if you want top of mind when you see creatives, you think performers, right? But there are many types of creatives. right?
Yes.
And maybe that I'll throw that as a question na lang to you. So
Yeah.
there's no shortage of creative talent in the Philippines. But maybe when we talk about the creative industry players, maybe very specifically, who are these creatives that we're trying to support this month and throughout the year?
Yeah. I get a lot of that question, and I'm happy that we're also starting off with that kind of question, Tiago, because the law that I mentioned a while back talks about the protection of the creative industry players that are part uh, directly or indirectly in the 73 creative sectors, because there are about 73 creative sectors and counting. That is not yet exhaustive list. We have subdivided them into a creative domain. And when we talk about creative domain, that's where we use the nomenclature. Creative domains are actually creative industries. That's
Mm.
why it is called Philippine Creative Industries in the Philippines, because in other countries, Tiago, they just consider all of the creative sectors as one umbrella of a creative industry. In the Philippines, it's about creative economy is the entirety. And then it consists of 9 creative domains or creative industries. And there are about creative sectors within it. So we start off, it could be a lesson type of enumeration, but we could start off the first domain, and I call it, Tiago, the law created a 10-story building.
Mm.
Just so for your imagination. And in the first floor, it is dedicated to what we call the audiovisual media floor. And so that's where you can find all sorts of film, the one that you're doing, the broadcasting,
Mm.
the blogs, for example. It also talks about a number of recorded music and musical scores are part of that first floor. So all of those that I just mentioned are just some of the creative sectors, or I call it different rooms within that floor of
Mm.
audiovisual. The second floor you could imagine is the digital interactive media. This is interesting, Tiago, because it talks about even the software and mobile applications is here. All the virtual, you can actually have the augmented and mixed reality games are part of the digital interactive media, and all other web design and something that is digitized creative content is within this floor. And if you move up to the third floor, you could probably be looking yourselves with the creative services space. This is interesting because you look at the normal creative services like urban landscaping, research and development, and then advertising and marketing. But then you look at on the other side that it talks also about communication and graphic design and even cultural and recreative services. So and then you move to the design, which is also interesting because we have the architecture there and the furniture, jewelry, toy, textile making is actually part of the design. And I think even the interior and spatial designing, Tiago, is part of this particular domain or fourth floors. And then if you move to the ones that are very common to us is actually the publishing and printed media domain. So in
Mm.
that particular fifth floor, you will see graphic novels and books and textbooks, and I think even mga magazines and newspapers are still in, and buhay pa ang traditional created space on public and printed. But if you move higher, and you see the performing arts there. That's the sixth domain. And that's where live musics come in, live theater, even the opera. And I think circus is also part. And interestingly, recently, Tiago, I've taken a talk to people who are into spoken poetry
Mm.
and spoken word and puppetry. And it's so interesting that even cinema and movie theater is part of the performing arts. And we had a recent, because the month of September also is the Philippine film industry month.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it's interesting that our performing arts is really alive in the Philippines. The seventh floor is given much attention on our visual artists. The visual arts domain, well, as you all know, Tiago, you have paintings, you have drawings, and even the art toys, the collection of it, Tiago, is very well known in the creative world. And the visual arts industry has been making some noise and waves all throughout this past 3 years. The most interesting part for me personally is actually the traditional cultural expression, because we are very particularly interested with the festival and the celebration. I think, Tiago, you will see that the entire Philippines has its own festivities. And each location, like Alabira, you have Mascara, you have Sinulog and all. But then there's one important item in the traditional cultural expression domain, which is gastronomy and culinary practices. And so this is how the story goes on from one generation to another, preserving that tradition of cooking and all. The ninth domain that is added to the list would be the cultural sites. And this is where you can find yourself more probably in the museums, in the galleries, and even those sites of cultural and historical significance. And lastly, ang pinaka-sampo is yung other emerging. So parang penthouse sa Tiago, nagpe-prepare tayo whether there will be some emerging technologies or creative domains that will be added. That's why it's 10. But officially, as of the moment, 9 lang yung medyo pwede nating mapag-usapan, Tiago. I hope it was a mouthful, but I hope that somehow provided you a context that it actually validated your statement kanina, Tiago, that we are not just talking about game and film and artists in the film industry, but we're talking about the entire gamut of cultural and creative sphere.
So, JD, I think it's a great visualization. The building, I think, largely because I just moved into a new building, so I'm keenly aware the buildings have shared services. They have shared amenities, and so similarly, all these domains may have a similar backbone of what kind of support they need, but they're also each has distinct needs. So I think it's a good visualization. And I think altogether, you might have mentioned this a few weeks ago, that altogether these domains contribute roughly 7% to our GDP. So this is not a small contribution.
That's 1.6. Yeah, that's 7.34 to be exact.
There
because
you go.
In the GDP, Tiago, the point is really huge. So 7.34% to be exact. But the year 2022. And a lot of people are asking me, Tiago, is that official? You said it's preliminary estimate because, Tiago, this is only on the premise that the creative industry is in the formal economy. And so we would like to argue that we are more than that. The global average is 6%. We're above it. Yeah. But then imagine that the 7.3% is contributed by 6.98 million lang. So almost 7 million Filipinos are creative. And so there are people that say, how about the gig economy? How about the freelance? That's our role in DTI actually, Tiago, to make sure that everybody will, come out in the open and then they'll be part of a formal creative economy of the Philippines.
Great. Absolutely. Yeah. In order for us to properly map out who they are, in order to then map out what they need. So actually, that was going to be my next question. I think it's great that we distinguish that there are different domains, 9 plus 1 domains, because each of these domains, they will have different needs. I think a video game, let's say an artist, a visual artist who works in video games, there are a lot. As you know, a lot of the AAA video games that are released every year, a lot of the environments, the characters, are all designed in the Philippines. Like I know of many that are clustered just south of Metro Manila, out in Cavite and Laguna. So that's really interesting. But their needs are going to be very different from the needs of live performers. Let's say independent actors and directors who want to stage plays or musicals, right? Very, very different needs. So in your initial mapping of the creative industries, what are some of these needs that they have that are underserved?
Yeah. So before I'll come to that, maybe it would be worth noting that there will be a number of weaknesses. So I just came in to the Department of Trade and Industry when I was appointed here to be the Director 3 of the Competitiveness Bureau. During that time, I can vividly imagine that I was given a number of books to read, all the stories of the past hearings before it became a law. And then there were actually, I think, if I could count it correctly, there are about 10 problems our weakness that we can actually talk about. Like, it's a story about high costs in doing business in the Philippines with regard to, for example, if you're a filmmaker and or a film producer, it will require you about 17 permits from the national down to the very barangay where or the island that where you will be shooting your film. And there's also stories about horror stories of counterfeiting and piracy. There were also a problem with about the country having a weak branding. Unlike, if you compare the Philippines to the Korean wave of Korea and all. And I think that's one of things. And then they've been talking about the lack of infrastructure for them to be able to, showcase or perform their thing. And there were also a question about the lack of original content in the Philippines. So a number of industries are trying to say na nawala na. So there's a problem with regard to parang copycat na lang, other than the counterfeiting and the piracy. And I think one thing is also interesting to note is that the skills that the industry, the players, the creative industry players we have in the Philippines is no longer matching what the requirement of the industry. So in all of the problems that I have mentioned, and there are plenty of them pa, we came up with 5 major common problems that are being faced by our creative industry players in the Philippines when we actually gathered all of the possible 73. So the first thing there is on the side of the government, looking at the creative industry, it talks about the lack of official statistics. So we just mentioned it a while back with regard to the 6.98 million is definitely not the entire creative economy players. The second problem is very interesting, the lack and limited access of finance and credit. So you just imagine, Tiago, that you are a micro, for example, or a small or a medium enterprise, and you've been trying to, do your textile making. So you are an ina-all weaver of our Bangsamoro friends. And then you see yourself like somebody will come in, oh, it's so nice to have this, Tiago, this ina-all. Can I have 1,000 of this? And then that ina-all weaver will just be shocked knowing that she cannot produce because she has not upscaled her business. It can only do so much. But the question is, you cannot do that because you don't have a working capital. And
Right.
so that limit, the working capital is not available because you don't know where to go. You don't have knowledge to go where these financial institutions are. And when you find them, it will be hard for you to get a loan. And so that's another problem. The third problem that we have encountered that is common in most, if not all, is actually the skills mismatch. Like we are talking about 1D, 2D animation, and then there's a 3D animation. And then for the lack of example, like there are a lot of people are trying to say that, you can do production in the Philippines, but the post-production is very hard in the Philippines because we don't have the much needed skills for that. The fourth problem, Tiago, is more about the limited access to technology. So we've been talking about a number of technological breakthrough, Industry 4.0, but the question is, where do we access that if I am a creative industry player? More so if I am far-flung. And it's a question about access to the internet, and there's so many technological infrastructure that are actually scarce and cannot be accessed by any. And lastly, pinaka-exciting, Tiago, is that we want to surface the fact that there have been a limited access to global market. And so gusto mo to showcase what you got here in the Philippines. And sometimes your audience may not necessarily in the Philippines, or there is a surplus of the things that you've been doing, and who shall be buying them. It could be non-Filipinos or those in the foreign land, but then accessing that is also a problem. So those are the 5 major problems that the DTI and the government have been trying to look into more closely and try to have programs that will solve them.
Just speaking to visibility of opportunity and the skills mismatch. I mean, that's precisely what we've been talking about all month, and also for this coming week with Philippine Blockchain Week. So largely around what are the new opportunities that these technologies are presenting, right? And how can our local industries, specifically the creative industries, capitalize on that? And something that came up many, many times is that if you look throughout history, with every new technology, the pioneers are always the artists. And we see that with virtual reality, for example. The very first innovations in VR were for video games, were for immersive experiences, and this is the realm of the artist, of the creative, and then it becomes, once the creative shows what can be done, then more industries come in, take those applications and make them sustainable through new businesses. So it's always great to see artists playing a leading role in innovation. And now with the government supporting that, I think hopefully this kicks off something really meaningful for the Philippines now. And you pointed out a couple really great points there. Listed a number of really compelling problems. And all of that speaks to a few weeks ago during the press launch, actually, of Philippine Blockchain Week. You were on the panel and you were commenting on how there were many government agencies represented on the panel. How this trust is really a whole of government approach. But you stressed that while there's a whole of government approach here, there needs to be a whole of society approach to supporting creatives. And so my question is, now you've gathered a number of, your cohort has gathered a number of different agencies across the government, educational institutions, private sector players. So who still is missing from the table that you would like to invite to join you in this trust to support creative industries?
I think that's the hardest question I've ever asked to Tiago, because it's really hard to really point out who is missing in that story, because when we talk about private sector participation, we're very happy that the creative associations, because just to have a backstory, Tiago, it will be difficult for the Department of Trade and Industry to really touch on the individual creative industry player. Like, we cannot just simply coordinate seemingly because of our systems and processes. So we work with the representation of the creative associations. Like, for example, I do not talk directly most often on the individual game developers, but I'm talking exactly to the Game Development Association of the Philippines. And so the GDAP is the one who is actually trying to bring in the bad news and the good news. And so we're heavily invested in that. So I just assume, Tiago, that the associations are well representing the membership of that association. But then the problem of this membership association, Tiago, I think is that if you are not part of this association, and I think that is just the missing link in all of this, because if you talk about the government, I'm just very happy to say and confidently say that gone are the days that when we talk about creative industry, yung mga industries they're saying, what's that? Now they know exactly what creative industry is all about. And they're actually enrolling all of their programs and activities to DTI as we represent the council. And you can see a fascinating story wherein the government are doing their job on that sphere. With regard to the private sector, I don't know if I could say it, that recently the Captain Stanley of the Philippine Airlines came in to us, like, voluntarily came to us, because they're working on exciting things to make use of our heritage and culture in their way they're doing business. I cannot disclose how they will be doing that, but maybe in the coming days they will be announcing what they mean by working with the creative sphere. And then we've listened to Netflix, we have been to with Meta, coming into this Spotify, and coming in. There are so many players, the platforms that we're talking about are coming into DTI, not unlike before that it will be hard to reach them. Now we have this symbiotic relationship now. When you talk about the academe, we've been working with the higher education institutions, and we're very thankful for CHED because they've been coordinating with us and then trying to link. But with or without the CHED's intervention, we've been receiving a number of collaboration proposals with our higher education institutions. And you look at the basic education, we've been working with DepEd, and then we found ourselves to be working with a number of institutions from the K-12 family. And if you look at those non-creative, Tiago, there are a number of companies that I could not just mention, but then they're coming into, they're not creative the way you use the technical definition of things, but they're coming into the play. So I think, just to end this long answer to your question, the final answer is that the missing link is that when a particular creative industry player is still in the informal, still
Mm.
in the underground, or still not yet in the formal grounds, I think that's the missing link. We need to have them on board because, Tiago, we may have misrepresented their needs. I
Mm.
may have enumerated problems a while back. I may have informed you that in all of the documents that I've read prior to me being the director of DTI, does not reflect the totality or the comprehensive view of the people, because there's only 7 million that were heard. Maybe there are be 20, 30 million more creative individuals that are not yet in the open. And with that, I think if that single missing link will just be unearthed, and I think we have a very strong data already, a very strong argument and the need for. But despite that, what's something good about this, Tiago, is that despite the fact that we have not yet received them openly and formally, we have already thought about them.
Yeah.
So we already estimated them, and we've said that if only we're correct in our assumption that their problems are talking about finance, access to technology, access to market, then probably we are moving in the good direction.
Yeah, so it's bringing the informal sector, what I suppose not formalizing it necessarily
Yeah,
immediately, but
it's
allowing them though to participate. I think that
yes,
might be the missing link. I see so many parallels between this and the startup community just a few years ago. So I, as a journalist prior to covering Web3 and now creatives, I was covering startups, and it's the same problem. And there were a lot of startups that were trying to solve that problem. For example, there are a couple startups that are hoping to create a data infrastructure that connects all of the, for example, sari stores,
yeah,
which is probably the most frontline FMCG kind of outlet you can get in this country. But there's no data that really understands how people are spending their money through
right.
sari stores. And so these startups are trying to weave them all together to create that, to capture all of that data, right, to create that infrastructure. And so similarly, I suppose, with the informal creative sector, we not to belabor the point, but there we do need to create that sort of capture that data, create that sort of infrastructure, just so we can nuance a bit the number of problems you listed out to see exactly what are the sources of funding, for example, available to them, or what kind of funding do they need. To which point, I mean, this is more of a personal point of curiosity when it comes to the second problem you pointed out, funding, right? In the startup sector, it's become very, very clear over the past, say, call it 10 years, that the kind of venture capitalist investing, angel investing even, that happens in California, in Europe, it just does not translate here in the Philippines. Right? The kind of businesses that Filipinos put up, the kind of practices, like they all need to be localized and nuanced, so that investors can reliably put money behind Philippine businesses. That's been a good thing and a bad thing for the startup community. When it comes to creatives, I would imagine, and it's hard to say creatives because, like you said, 10 different domains or 9 plus 1 different domains. But for example, in the realm of, let's say, live performance, called theater, for example, putting up a show, the returns are completely different, right? And I imagine the kind of money that flows into these businesses need to be a bit more long-term thinking in terms of the returns. Maybe the returns are not just financial. Maybe the returns are also cultural, right? But I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on this? How do creative industry players find funding, and what do you think is missing there? Who are the players missing there to help them put their initiatives, get them off the ground?
Well, when we talk about the value chain and the capital chain in terms of funding system, well, typically there will always be some part of the proposition that it is always investment. So that's the thing. Like I was with Repertory Philippines. I was with Tita Minde. The first show of the Snow White and the Prince happened last Saturday. The first show at Bawat Bonggang Bagay with John Santos with Kong Top de Venecia. You have Ramahari. one thing we've been trying to communicate is that the very membership of the theater group are the one putting in money. And so you will see a self-investment type of scheme. But seeing that it has also transformed into like not just the foundation, because if you typically you'll see a number of theater groups, if my recollection is correct, they work like a foundation. And so for those people who are actually wanting to promote and preserve and conserve Philippine theater, for example, they're probably pouring in money as philanthropists and those people who are culture advocates of the country. They're putting in. That's the second layer. The third layer would actually be the businessmen who would like to also take a portion of the pie, or a slice of a pie, and they're bringing in terms of their spaces. Just imagine Greenbelt 1, where on stage of the Snow White will be removed there, demolished, and then in come next year, you will not see that anymore. And so, for example, the repertory are now looking forward with finding their new home. And if you are a foundation or you are the one doing the show, you cannot just simply have your own physical structure, because the ROI would definitely be a long period of time, let alone the ROI of a particular season art, right? You have the Snow White and the Prince that will run from that Saturday until December, just for them to be able to properly have an ROI. More so when you have to. So they are reliant on the investment of the infrastructure of theaters and all. And this a problem, Tiago, in Cebu. Would you believe, like in Dumaguete, we have Silliman University, we have Luz Auditorium there. But when you go to Cebu, you can hardly enumerate a particular theater, for example. So I'm bringing, like we were working with Lisa Makuha, the Ibong Adarna has just ended its season, and the question is, we would like to bring it across the country. And the question is, where should we be bringing Ibong Adarna with the same facility that is world class, right? So I think that's where the third layer of investment, because those people are not into a creative sphere, but are trying to make use and make money at the same time, join the conversation. The missing there is that I think government is not investing directly to this kind of performances. And we believe that the society, the private one, the civil society, can do that on their own. But now it's not actually missing that we need to have, but I think the government is now looking at ways to be able to assist our performing arts group, for example, to be able to continue the loop of investment, and perhaps create more spaces, like not just CCP, PICC, the Black Box and all, and the Metropolitan Theater. We're actually giving much emphasis of the use of our National Museum as a place and haven for all the creative players. So the recently renovated and established National Museum in Cebu, for example, I came there, and then they're saying that they're open to any activities that will actually co-promote the museum heritage and all other displays there. At the same time, create your social types of events there. And so now you will see that the missing link that I'm trying to point out is now being filled up slowly because of the law.
So venue's a big factor there. You're right. Yeah. It really is a bottleneck when it comes to live theater. There are only so many venues, and we're just talking about Metro Manila. You're right, and going back to your previous point, this needs to be a nationwide initiative, of course. So, speaking of nationwide initiative, I know that towards the end of this month, you guys are at DTI are putting together this Philippine Creative Cities and Municipalities Competitiveness Congress. So I believe that's on the 28th. Maybe could you tell me? I was personally very excited to hear about this, because the role of the LGU is so crucial. Because they are at the front lines of figuring out what exactly the needs of their respective creative communities or communities in general. So could you tell me a bit about that? What's coming up, and maybe the rationale behind this approach to supporting creatives?
Tiago, I want to say you've been asking the most sensible questions, so I'm happy that I'm part of this. I even asked Jasana, like, I'm so tired and all because of all of this of all of these activities. But having you here, sensitive and sensible questions makes me energized. But anyway, you mentioned startup. That's why I'm also handling startups. So
Right.
the Competitiveness Bureau is actually working towards that, and we're looking forward, Tiago, of conversation later on in the next months on the creative startup. So because
Right.
we have the knowledge, we have the resources, we know that startup community together with the OST and the ICT because of the innovative startup act. And then so we're in the middle of the story, and then we're saying, how could a startup be able to help the creative industry? Should there be creative startup, or should we encourage startups for creative industry? So problems of the creative industry will be the kind of problem solving mechanism of the startup, and that side. And then now you are asking me something close to my heart, because we're also doing that in the Competitiveness Bureau on the creative cities and
Yes.
creative municipalities. But then just a context, there is what we call the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO.
Mhm.
UNESCO has created a network. They call it the UNESCO Creative Cities Network. If I'm not mistaken, there are about 300 UNESCO created cities all over all over the world. And it talks about a UNESCO created city either on literature, either in a creative city of design, a creative city on crafts and folk arts. It could be a UNESCO creative city of film. It could be on music. It could be on media arts. And it could be on gastronomy. And
Mhm.
we're happy to inform you, Chago, that in the year 2017, our dear Baguio got the UNESCO Creative City for Crafts and Folk Arts designation. And in 2019, our beloved Cebu got the UNESCO Creative City for Design. And now we're moving towards the direction wherein Iloilo is vying for the UNESCO Creative Cities for Gastronomy. And we're just praying for Iloilo because this coming November is the announcement. Now, and you look at it, like there are a number of cities in the country that would like to bid for the next designation. And the next bid, or the round of bid, because every other 2 years lang yan siya, Tiago, we have actually an applicant for crafts and folk art, which is the city of San Fernando.
Mm.
We also have some application interest from the gastronomy sphere. We have the city of Angeles. At the same time, the city of Silay will try to bid for the 2025 UNESCO Creative City for Gastronomy. And you got Quezon City for film, and you got Olongapo for music. So all of these cities that I've just mentioned, those are already able to get the designation, and we wishing to have that. These are some of the example of the cities that would like to embrace what we call the creative spaces. The creative spaces in our nomenclature consists of a creative district, a creative hub, a creative co-working spaces, a creative lab. This is where a physical or a digital or a combination of sort, an infrastructure mechanism that will allow our creative industry players, the one that I mentioned, in all of the 9+1 domains, to be able to have and find their place and home. Maybe you will see that the 10-story building that I said imaginarily will actually be physically and tangibly happening. And these particular creative cities now embrace the fact that when you have creativity that spur innovation, and innovation actually drives competitiveness, and competitiveness drives nation building, economic development, and economic development brings to national building. If you follow the same path, then you can say that developing creative industry in a particular city or municipality is a way forward.
Yeah.
It may not give so much job and employment, but it can give so much promise in that sphere. And so the Creative Cities and Municipalities Congress happening on the 20th of September in the Manila Hotel will gather the foremost competitive cities and municipalities in the country. There are about 33 highly urbanized cities. There are about 110 component cities in the country, and you still have the first class to the sixth class municipalities. There are about 1,634 plus in our record. And if you see that all of these 1,634 been trying to make sure that they're the most competitive, about 100 plus of them make it to the cut. And all of these 100 plus most competitive cities and municipalities will be gathered. They'll talk ways on how to make that reality happen. And so it so happened, like if you would, I'm personally inviting you, Tiago, you can go there, you can deepen your understanding and awareness. And when you mentioned about the role of the cities and municipalities in uh, providing the platforms and the avenue for our creative industry, you're correct in saying that. But in terms of how they will do it, we give much power to the cities and municipalities and the LGUs how they want their cities and municipalities go with this story of creative economy. Because at the end of the day, Tiago, we don't want it to national dictating the local
Right.
government. We want that they have to find their own mechanism of trying to say, baka yung mga problema, Tiago, na mention ko, maybe of the 5, they only have the 2 of them. And so they will concentrate on solving the 2 while maintaining their current efforts in making sure that the 3 will not be their problem. So that's where we see our national agenda for creative development into the local agenda for creating development in the creative industry.
I mean, so I guess taking notes are inspired by UNESCO's framing of this. What it sounds like is the Philippine Creative Cities. This is a framework that you're providing these different LGUs, and it's their job to interpret that framework and nuance it specifically for their communities. I think that's really exciting.
If we could, because just very timing that we are starting the Philippine Blockchain Week, like in the cultural economy and creative economy, Tiago, we always believe that it has produced a number of symbolic texts, and this actually sort of the story of the internet of value is leading us to the another phenomenon of a symbolic value. And the technological breakthrough, blockchain, metaverse, the NFTs, and the DAOs are coming into play. They coexist and sometimes resist in each other. But the question is how our artists, our musicians, our creative industry players be able to push the established boundaries of creative economy using the tools and platforms of either Web3, blockchains, and all sorts. It's a question about that our creative industry practitioners and players have been embracing technology. But this time around, it's a different area where they can actually look at the convergence of creativity, culture, heritage, and innovation. And I'm rallying and pushing the agenda, Tiago, that we have to give these technological breakthroughs a chance to be able to prove themselves that there are more value than risk involved. That we just need to be very open to the conversation. Because recently, Tiago, we've been being asked why we're pushing for blockchain, why you are pushing for Web3, where we're talking about NFTs. Are we not killing the very notion of conservation and preservation of Filipino identity and Filipino brand? I know that there has been a number of polarizing mechanism and polarized masyado ang discussion with regard to the convergence of creativity, culture, and the innovation and technology on the other side. But rest assured that the Department of Trade and Industry, together with the Philippine Creative Industry Development Council, is trying to strike an exquisite balance between conserving and preserving tradition, culture, and heritage of the Philippines and the Filipino in general, while we're actually promoting and supporting initiatives that will bring us to this sustainable mechanism. And in that sustainable mechanism, we want that technology will be an ally rather than an enemy. We look forward to trying to bring forth the notion that the piracy and privacy could still be maintained and sold in terms of piracy. And we maintain the privacy of all the particular players in the area. But we're trying to also promote that we need an industry that is thriving, that is inclusive, that is sustainable. lagi kong binibiro sa Tiago na if you are a musician, and then you try to, for the sake of cultural and artistic expression, your personal inclination to music, and you just continue playing. But if the music of your stomach begin to play, then that could be problematic. And it's a story also of whether or not that kind of music will be passed on to one generation or to one generation. Maybe it will be appreciated now because you're there playing it. But how do we be actually to send it to the next generation? And I think technology will be a best platform for that. But we are also wary of the challenges and the risk involved in all of this technology. That's why we put so much premium in making the policies and the policy environment and the processes and the programs that will make sure that you are well protected. The law, the RA 11904, also has a very good salient feature, Tiago. It has a mechanism to create a working group, a committee. We call it the Creative Workers' Rights Committee. And so I think when there are some grievances, there's some problems. Because the story of technology and blockchain and all of this is also a story of legal ownership with regard to that and how it is being protected. Although the law has always played catch up with technology, I believe that when we look at things at a brighter side, we would like to bank onto the idea that our lawmakers, our legal practitioners are able to rally against that kind of notion that they are too far. And then if we bring them to the table, I think the entire story of the use of this technology will be all. So at the end of the day, I want that everybody will continue their enthusiasm as we elevate Filipino creativity and advance Creative Philippines.
Amazing. I think there is such a clear synergy between what DTI and what the government is doing for creatives and what a lot of the industry players are doing with Web3.
Awareness.
It seems to me this Philippine Creative Cities and Municipalities approach is a decentralized approach. It's grassroots upwards, just like in Web3. And I think that, the one of the best points that you've made today is really that in embracing innovation, we have to make sure that innovation is led by grassroots communities, because it's those communities, one, that need to benefit the most from it, but also two, we have to make sure that they are not the ones who get left behind by it.
Yeah.
And we're not just widening the gap. No, we're closing it. So, JD, thank you so much for your time. I want to make sure to get you out of here before 11. So I really appreciate it.
I think I would like to thank you. Yeah, I will be the one to thank you, Tiago, for helping us. You're extending the advocacy and the campaign. We're just very happy because we can, we try ourselves to reach a wider audience, and we have some constraints. And in as much as we would like to be in all of the platforms, we cannot just simply reach them. And your platform is one of the best ones that could actually articulate. It's more about, Tiago, diba? It's all about learning new things and try to relearn the things that has already been there and it's still useful. And I think what is more important in our conversations is to unlearn the things that are no longer true. And it might be helpful in the past, but then it has already been, there's a reignition and reshaping of things. And unlearning is a hard way. So by learning and relearning and unlearning how the technology be used in the creative sphere, for example, is a very good use case already, because other industries will follow suit, definitely. We believe that the creative industry will provide positive and negative spillover effects in other industries. And when we talk about the good things that is happening in the creative industry through the use of technology and the embracing of innovation, and I think other creative industry will look, the other players in other industries will look at the creative industry as a use case for that matter. And so we can only thank you, Tiago, and the rest of the team behind your show to promoting the value and the pivotal role of the creative industry, not just for cultural development, but for the nation building.